Being the appointed hour, 11 o'clock, we'll start our work session. And I will remind everybody to turn your mics on because we are live streaming. We got a little lax about that last week, including myself, so we gotta make sure the mics are on. The first bill we have up is House Bill 419 relative to Math Learning Communities Program of the Community College System. And I see Chancellor Rubenstein and Director Reed are here. I'm assuming you want to make a comment or two. Or Representative Ladd, do you want to speak to this?
Sure. We don't have a. No, I should be, somebody should be taking notes.
Oh, here, just right on the back of one of these.
Well, there's
There you go.
she usually puts.
Good call. You got a pen?
Yeah, thank you, sir. I have.
Okay.
I'm not exactly, I've been doing better.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Representative Emmerich and members of Division 2. For the record, my name is Rick Ladd. I'm from Haverhill, New Hampshire. This bill is really timely. If you look at the sheet I just handed to you, I'll try to get through it quickly. I know you have a lot on the docket today. But Math Learning Communities Program, as a result of what we've seen over the last, if you look at the first in the box there, 2012, back when Paul Leather and Jenny Berry were at the department, Representative Heath is very familiar with that, as she worked there also prior to that. I won't say how much prior, Representative Heath, but there was a committee formed, a task force, look at mathematics in our state. That task force back then identified that we're not accomplishing what we should be accomplishing in mathematics. That's 2012. And looking at where we are today, we sometimes think, well, all this is a result of the pandemic, COVID-19. It's not. Where we have with mathematics, we've had a continual slide going in this state in terms of our performance and proficiency in mathematics. I've highlighted two of those three items down the bottom there. New Hampshire's NAEP report card, October 2022, New Hampshire students' test scores fell during the COVID pandemic, continuing a long-term decline. The biggest decline, both nationally and in New Hampshire, was in our 8th grade math. According to 2022 assessments taken by a sample of students, 30% of the state's 8th graders and 40% of our 4th graders are proficient or above in mathematics. 48% of students proficient in mathematics in 2019, and you can read on. When I came before Division 2 years ago, I handed to them a flow chart of tracking cohorts, the same group of students as their 5th graders, 6th graders, 7th graders, right through to high school. And looking at one of those cohorts, and I'll leave you a copy of this because this is ancient history. However, it's reflective of exactly what, if you look at iPlatform today, which is the data center that the DOE has for looking at the same information. For example, the 5th grade class in 2010 was at 75% proficient in mathematics, 6th grade 71%. In the 2012, as 7th grader, 67%. 8th grade, 66%. That's 2013. In 2016, because there's 2 years we didn't do the testing there, in 11th grade, 40% proficient. It just goes like this, and then we see this real drop coming out of middle school and going into high school. And when we looked at this particular program in front of you today, we looked at developing, I did this in conjunction with the Community College System New Hampshire and folks behind me, and Beth Dorian. I don't see Beth here today. But we looked at how can we really change this trend that we have going on in the state. So we implemented a program called Math Learning Communities. That was a grant that community college system had received, $200,000. It's a grant that did a lot of good. By the time we were in several years into this grant, we had 37, 38 high schools participating across the state. What it does is you can look on the bottom side of the sheet here. You can see that, for example, in Algebra 1 is taken in the 10th grade. Upon completing the 10th grade, what we gave to the students was the next generation Accuplacer test. That's a test or an assessment which has been used to identify readiness for going into the community college system. So we wanted to find out if these students coming out of 10th grade Algebra 1 are really ready to go ahead to Algebra 2, trig, geometry, calculus. And we found that there was a number of students that weren't really math ready. They scored like a 63 or lower in the Accuplacer test. So what we looked at is there another way of trying to get the math foundations that are necessary into these youngsters before they graduate. Because what we were also seeing that when they went off to community college or post-secondary education, primarily the community college system, we saw that 60% of the students at that time required what we call remedial education. Now we're trying to assist these students through working in the class and working at specific holes or weaknesses. But of that 60%, 50% never got a 2-year degree. So we spent a lot of money, and they spent a lot of money trying to get this degree, but they had this hole. They weren't ready for college level mathematics. So what we did at the end of 10th grade, after working with with counselors, math teachers in the schools, we looked at this next generation Accuplacer test assessment and determined there were students which would benefit from going a different track to try and get these skills into them. So what this program did is set a program called Math Foundations and then quantitative math, which would be taught in the 12th grade. So Math Foundations in 11th grade. Students went that track and learned the mathematics through different ways. They applied the mathematics. They looked at the skills that are necessary that Algebra 1 links with Algebra 2. It was taught in such a way that it was applied mathematics. Upon completing that course, and those students that went on to quantitative math, if they scored on that Accuplacer at a level, there was a score that we were able to identify, and if they got a C or better, they automatically received the 4 credits for college mathematics. So they are ready to go into college and compete with other students, and they already had that math requirement under their belts, and we're able to go farther. So what the program happened is that we haven't funded the $200,000 that's necessary to keep this afloat. Through the community college system, we received materials, textbooks, worksheets, all that. We also received training in the summertime. This money includes bringing teachers down from various schools and having teachers teaching teachers that have been in this program, and with the assistance of professional folks out of the community college system, training these people on how to teach math foundations and quantitative math. They went back to their schools and we saw tremendous success. So, and the $200,000 pays for the transportation down in the summertime and pays for the instruction. We're also receiving from the community college system direction and support and coordination of this program. And that would be through the community college system, and I'm sure they can explain that to you as they come out. So this is a timely bill, as I've mentioned to you, because we have this real issue in our state right now, and you're going to see a number of bills floating at you this year trying to resolve how we can help raise the bar in mathematics in the state. Yeah, you can look at the aggregate scores, and yes, we are 4th or 5th highest in the country on our aggregate scores, but we're not where New Hampshire wants to be. I just had a bill this morning, and we were talking about proficiency in Londonderry and Nashua and some of our high schools. You look at the math proficiency scores And quite frankly, it's pretty pathetic. We are not where we need to be. And so what we need to do is get this training into folks. We have a lot of schools now are trying to start to correct this, but this is something that's bigger than that. We need to correct it on our state level. We need to find out where the holes are and remediate those holes. And you'll see us come forward with an individual at DOE to help us do that. So I don't want to take any more time. I know you got a bit busy schedule ahead of you. I will drop off some of this information which I have on charting the cohorts as they go through school. We've done it for all these different groups, and the same trend is there. At the end of middle school, our scores take a huge dive. This is one reason why we did several years ago require 4 years of mathematics. 1 year of the math is embedded. You have to have 3 years to get out as a minimum credits to get out of high school, but we require 4 years. One of those courses in the high school has to be embedded, or take the fourth year of mathematics, embedding math skills into social studies, using spreadsheets, knowing how to make a spreadsheet, using it in science. That's embedded math. That has to be approved by your local school board. Thank you.
Questions? Kate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there a gender difference?
A gender difference. When I was a school principal back in Maine years ago, and I ended up my administration, all that elsewhere, but we did a study up in Aroostook County, Presque Isle, Caribou area, Limestone, when there was an air base up there. We took the girls and put them for mathematics in one class. We put the boys over there. All the social stuff disappeared. We did see growth on the part of both groups. So then it was decided that, well, spreading them apart is not really the answer. The answer is try to stop all that social stuff from going on. And that's tough to do when you're in high school. I've been there. So I'm not going to answer your questions all the way, but I think that you might ask the community college system behind me, are they saying, gender related to what they're seeing up there? I don't know. I don't have the answer on that one. I'm not going to go there either.
Well, I guess I was asking, your data that you're collecting doesn't track gender.
No,
Yeah,
the
that's
data
fine.
that we're tracking is aggregate of the school. If it's more than 10 students at a grade level, of course, and aggregate for the state.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Ladd. So the question I wanted to ask you, I think you answered it, but was where'd you come up with the 200,000? It seems like now, I think I heard you say now that you're just replacing the original grant.
Yes, and that was the original grant, 200,000. And what we have is we have people already at community college system are well trained on delivering. The materials are, I've seen all those materials. They're easily run off with a copy machine, and those are available. And what I've been told by the community college system that this will make this program work. Remember, we do have 37, 38 high schools which had started that program. So a lot of those materials and training is already there. And we're going to use people that are trained in this to train others. So there should be some reduction in costs that way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you again, Representative Ladd. Matter of fact, I experienced Limestone and Loring. Air
I know
Force
you did,
Base.
Mr. Air Force.
So, hey, it was a good experience. Matter of fact, that's where we first started our married life. How much effect do you think the systems like Everyday Math, like Lattice, Common Core, all these, have they come to roost?
I don't know if I'd put it on that. I had a meeting with math teachers in the Rivendell School District not more than about a month and a half, 2 months ago. Rivendell is an interstate district. We have Orford and Fairleigh, Vermont. And I met with all the math teachers at the high school, middle, elementary, and high school. I think that there is an issue that we need to address locally as well our math teachers talking with math teachers at different levels. Oftentimes, the elementary kids in Fairleigh are taught, all our New Hampshire kids go over to Vermont for elementary school. The high school, middle schools on the Orford side in New Hampshire. Do we get together and really discuss K through 12 and coordinate our curriculum and our instruction? And are we all seeing instruction the same? When I met with those folks, there was questions. Half of them felt we have to really go after the multiplication tables, memorization. The other half saying, well, maybe we ought to just teach them how it works, the principles behind it. So we're split in terms of, you know, how to teach. And so in my district up in Haverhill, SAU 23 right now, they're looking at their curriculum right now and think about overhauling the whole thing. That's good. However, it may be costly as well. This is why we need to have the analyst there at the Department of Education. It's going to help us do that deep dive. Maybe there's only holes in our current math program. We can clean up the holes and save money and also increase our proficiency. So I would say much of this, I believe, is at the local level. I wouldn't lay it on Common Core. I wouldn't lay it on, because we all believe kids have to be competent. Common Core was made up of competencies. And so what we got to look at and make sure those competencies are being taught at the level that we're testing. And that's another issue. Matching up our assessment to our curriculum, looking at our standards. Do our standards parallel at the grade levels, at the state, to what our grade levels are doing? Sometimes you can have an assessment test and it's testing, for example, it could be social studies, U.S. history. We teach U.S. history at what grade level? Another school at another grade level. If you test at that one grade level earlier, the one that hasn't had it yet is obviously going to have low assessment scores. So one of the keys is that we get on board with our assessment program and know what we're assessing and align it with what we're teaching.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Ladd, for
You're
taking the questions. I really should start by apologizing for inadvertently sending the Education Committee an email I intended for the Election Committee. I got my bills mixed up, so sorry for that little bit of spam. Still a good video, but not meant for you. My apologies. My question is, since I'm a freshman, could you help me understand a bit more why, this program is valuable in terms of, why is the community college needed to assist the high schools, deliver on their math curriculum? Because, obviously there are more experienced people here, but I could really use a bit of that background.
Well, the community college system as well as the university system have the folks which are training our teachers, for one. In looking at this, they have the capability of coordinating rather than having, let's say, the department do it. We're working with career pathways and certification that's offered through the community college system, which is oftentimes linked through our concurrent and dual enrollment programs, which are taught in the high school. There's a lot of interaction now between the community college system and high schools, and I hope it goes down to middle schools as well. So in that regard, I think that to use, and they have the staff available to work with our high school teachers. We have now some, in fact, a number. We're seeing gains going forward, especially when we look at our concurrent dual enrollment program. Participation is going up. However, here is an opportunity for us to use that expertise, that wisdom that the community college has in saying, here's some of the holes we are seeing when we are receiving these students in the high school, from the high schools. We have oftentimes thought it was a community college system. You fix this. But after we discussed on the education committee for years, it's not the community college's problem. It's our K through 12 issue. We're sending the kids to them in a remedial fashion. And so they're saying, here's the holes we see, we can work with you. I think it's great. We should look at education not as K-12, but K-16.
Yeah. Quick follow-up. And this is strictly a voluntary program where high schools can choose to, take the help or not.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. the way we teach teachers, is that a problem? Is that the problem? In other words, the teachers' colleges, I mean, we are, from your assessment.
We have a teacher shortage committee going on right now. I'm on that. There's a lot of different variables which are coming into why we have that teacher shortage. And it has to do also with the shortage areas which we're seeing are science, math, special education, technology. Those are the shortage areas. Mathematics has always been a shortage area. How we're teaching mathematics maybe they need more math there. I don't know at that level. Maybe they need less gen ed and more skill-oriented subjects at the wonderful article in the Wall Street Journal this last weekend on why we have 4-year degrees. Maybe we only need 3. Take all the gen ed stuff out and teach the skills kids need.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. This program is wonderful. And I think that every kind of refresher or anything we can do to help our students renew their interest in mathematics is another way to build their mathematics. Kids all learn at different levels, at different paces. And for so many students, they forget what they've learned. And I think this is a way to catch them up, especially before they go into the community college. It's a wonderful program. I'm really disappointed that, in fact, we haven't funded this consistently. I remember very well when Paul Leather and I worked with the community college about the level of mathematics at the community college, and we were really concerned. So I hope that we decide to retain this for consideration for the budget.
You know, I hope so too. When I was working with General Barrett, he was the AG over at the National Guard here. He and I both went to OCS Army, and when I was talking with him, when we took our howitzer batteries in the state here and put them into more of a missile-oriented, we shared our battalion with West Virginia and New Hampshire, went in the same unit. He told me the folks, we want to hire folks from New Hampshire, not West Virginia, because the New Hampshire kids are thinkers, they have good professional work skills, but they all have this innate ability to do the mathematics that we need. We just need to keep it there. But we are strong, our kids are ready for this, and we shouldn't leave any of these youngsters behind, especially when we have this alternative way of really ensuring that it's taught the way they learn, matching learning style with teaching style.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Ladd. I think I just have a quick follow-up question to make sure I heard you correctly. I think when you were speaking about your little handout here that at one point you said the $200,000 would cover both transportation and instruction. Did I hear
That's
that correctly?
for the training program in the summertime. They get a mileage reimbursement similar to what we receive as legislators. Yep.
Thank you, Representative. So in North Conway, the community college is going to eliminate their overhead with their physical brick and mortar school that they're using right now and move the programs into the Kennett High School. And just recently, President Lloyd made a presentation to the local school board, and he started out by saying, we have these programs and how do we attract people to the programs? But then they turned it around and rethought it and said, why don't we bring the programs to where the kids are? So bringing all their dual and concurrent and their running start programs. And by the way, at a much discounted price, $150 per course. And also building up their college credits while they're still in high school. And by bringing the community college and merging it with the high school.
And that's a good move forward. That's what has to be done elsewhere in the state as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Representative Ladd.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to speak on this bill? Welcome, Chancellor.
Good morning. Mark Rubenstein from the Community College System. I'll just speak briefly to reinforce what Representative Ladd shared. We've been doing a little bit of background work since Representative Ladd brought this back to the table. We've looked across the community college system to identify colleagues who've been working on this project when it was first initiated. We've done some outreach to identify educators in secondary schools who'd be interested partners for this. Starting to take a look at curriculum to figure out the courses. So we're prepared to support this if the legislature chooses to reinvest.
Any questions for the chancellor? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Entertain a motion? To retain?
To retain.
Nice.
I knew it
It's made by Joe, seconded by Mary. All those in favor, just raise your hand. We won't call the roll. Okay, unanimous for the record. Okay, I think we'll close discussion on House Bill 419, and we'll move to House Bill 420. Has to do with the dual and concurrent enrollment. Representative Ladd, do you have a comment you'd like to make?
Well, thank you once again. For the record, Rick Ladd, Haverhill, New Hampshire. The dual and concurrent enrollment program is one which, when we started this program, how many years ago? I would say 2017 there roughly, or 18. This is a program, and Representative Bucco just referenced that, $150 for a course right now while you're in high school, versus waiting till after you graduate from high school to take that same course, $150 for the course, but after high school, if you're going to do it at the community college system, it would cost you close to what, $1,300. So just think of that savings, that if a student could get this done while they're in grades 10, 11, or 12, what the bill before you does, we are now extending this program to grade 10, beyond 11 and 12, which we're already doing it. We're also opening it up to, rather than 2 courses per year, one can take up to 5 courses per year. And we're also extending it to courses that are not just STEM courses, science, tech, engineering, and mathematics. After discussions with folks at the community, our CTE centers, career technical education centers, and people in the classrooms throughout the state and high school, we've learned that there are a lot of writing skills that a person needs in order to communicate, both thinking skills and logic skills and rhetoric. And these are taught not necessarily always through this STEM course. There's a number of other courses which we want students to take while they're in high school, which are not STEM, simply because it motivates them that I can go to higher education. I can make it. And my own daughter did this years ago in another state, in Alaska, where she took some courses in child care while she was in high school and got college credits from UAF, University of Alaska Fairbanks, for that, while she was also getting credit at the same time for graduating from high school. They did this way before we did it. She took these courses and found out she can do it. Now she's a speech pathologist down at Pawleys Island, South Carolina, and having a wonderful career. It was the start. And those credits were accepted by Elmira College on her bachelor's level, and then accepted later when she went to University of South Carolina Med School to get the audiology degree. So this program allows students to receive college credit at the same time they're getting high school credit. They can take the course in the high school. The high school teacher who's teaching this course has to meet all the standards of a professor at the community college system in New Hampshire. You're going to have to have your master's. You're going to have meet all those criteria that are necessary to be a teacher or professor at the community college system. So the standards aren't lessened any. They're the same standards while the course is being taken. But what it does do, it allows students to start taking these courses early on in their high school careers. We have some students now that are graduating from high school, believe it or not, they have close to 1 whole year of college credit already under their belts. And that is transferable into the community college system. And after we worked with the community college system and the university system last year in trying to ensure that these are transferable between the community college system and the community college system and the university system, where we have 30 different degrees, which that is being done in right now, we're seeing the system working together, high school, community college, and the university system, and trying to ease the burden of this debt that students, we have the second or the highest college level debt in the country here in New Hampshire. We can avoid that. And when we initiated this bill back in 17, we were only paying in this program $850,000 in the first year, and then FY19, $950,000. It's since grown now to its $1.5 million per year, and this bill is asking we go to $3.25 million per year. By doing this, you're saving up in the double-digit figures, millions of dollars for our students later on if they had to take all these courses later on. So it's saving debt. At the same time, it's raising the bar while we're in high school, and that is needed. So I will stop there. I do have a handout. I can make copies for you, get that to you, as well as I did in the first one. I'll get all this to you for the record.
Okay, questions, Tom?
Thank you. So if I understand this program, this provides the tuition for 5 courses, and if a student wants to take more than that, they can pay for it on their own.
It's out of their own pocket, yes.
But it does provide the tuition for up to 5.
Up to 5, which is a tremendous gain for those students.
It certainly is. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned competencies before. Why should we have a line between community college and high school? If you're competent in something, it doesn't make any difference when you get that knowledge. And to fill a matrix, it would seem so you would eliminate that line of, or have the competency at a level, say at the college level, or on a subject. What do you feel about that?
I'm having a hard time tracking what you're asking.
Well, you said competency.
Yeah.
Okay, your competency in English, let's say. Okay, you develop a standard and meet that standard. Once you meet that standard, it doesn't make any difference when you meet that standard, as long as you meet that standard, because that way, even an 8th grader could, if you write the standard correctly, it would work. It seemed to me it would work. I took physics in high school, and the person teaching it knew his subject well, but he couldn't get it into this head. I took the same subject at the community college level, and he was a previous engineer, mechanical engineer at General Electric, and I could follow him, and I got an A. I mean, it's if the delivery isn't on how you learn, that's a big problem.
It comes down to teaching style and learning style. And there's some of you that are very auditory, some of you are very tactile, physical type stuff in learning. And there's other methods too. When I took trigonometry, I could regurgitate everything in it. Where I really learned trig is when I was dropped out of a Huey in Vietnam with my aiming sticks and all that, and triangulation and surveying, trying to figure out where we're going to put that battery coming in. I learned how to do that real quickly, and it made sense because I was actually doing it. I wanted to get out of there. And so I guess there's many students like myself that have a hard time reading this and say, okay, I like to do it. I learn as I do. And just like in your carpentry, you learn from your mistakes. Well, it goes on to teaching style, learning style. If you have a teacher that's not on the same page as far as how you learn, you're going to have a tough time. That happens right down in first grade. second grade.
Right. Well, to follow up with what you just said, in that physics example, I love to hunt at the time, especially then, and the example was trig, and using a trig to shoot a deer. How many feet would you have to lead the deer if you knew how fast the deer was going across your field of view? I mean that fits right in. And what I developed here was a love for trig, because there's a lot of things you can do with trig that in other parts of your life. I mean, it was just amazing what he could get into this head again.
Questions? Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we all agree the merits of the dual enrollment program are excellent. I think we all like it a lot because we've talked about it multiple times. I'd like to move forward and just make a motion that we retain it.
Me too. Yeah, but I'll
Thank you. It's a great program, and thank you for expanding it to thinking skills and the writing skills. That's wonderful. But can you give me a narrative of, so this money goes to the community college. If you didn't have this money, would there be courses not offered in the high school in this program? I understand that it's going for tuition, but where I have a gap of my understanding is, if you didn't have this, would there not be courses in the high school that do this? Do you understand what I'm saying?
This program, of course, you have Running Start, early college.
Yep.
A high school student can also do this at the college location, where you can take a course there and get credit the same way. It will cost you a little bit more, but it can be done right there. And we have students who are doing that. That's where, and I want to thank very much Shannon and Mark behind me. The community college has been a real proponent and leader in working with public K through 12 education. And they deserve that recognition for delving down and helping us, not just there, but with Career Tech as well. And so it's inspiring to see programs like this. This was, I talk with them often about this program, but this proposal is coming out of them saying that we can really get more kids into this program. We can strengthen this program and help save that debt that they're incurring later on. And that's a critical component of this program. Just do the mathematics. And you're good at that because that's your job here in finance. But look at what would it cost a student to take these courses, not as Running Start or early E-Start, early college. What would it cost later after that high school graduation? You would see it in the millions of dollars. And so this is a tremendous opportunity that we should not lose. The money here is a definite payback without question.
if I may. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you for taking the questions. I am looking at the bill language, and obviously we understand the intent behind increasing the cap, but I'm not sure I understand, and I'm actually very concerned about the language that removes the requirement that those be STEM classes, because to me, what made this program very effective is that it was focused on, expertise that we agree the state is in dire need and we need more students trained in. The fact that we remove that seems to lose that focus. And I'm just trying to understand the intent behind that and how do you feel that would benefit, the state versus having left that in while still increasing the cap?
I think part of that question should be asked of Dr. Rubenstein behind me, the chancellor. But I can tell you that when I've spoken with the directors of career tech education throughout this state, there's such a thing they call soft skills. You have the skills very specific to the trade that they're learning. But if they don't have the skills in how to communicate and interpret things and fill out an invoice and do other components of the job, which are above and beyond knowing how to operate the machine press or the die cast material, that is where this is opening it up to that side of the slate, so we can get to communication skills as an opportunity to be used to get credit for that type of training that you absolutely have to be successful in any career.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up. No disagreement on the soft skills. I've taught for a living, and trust me, the teaching part is way harder than the understanding the technical side. And I've rubbed elbows with a lot of geeks and people who really had a hard time functioning outside of their, happy place. But while those particular skills are indeed necessary, this one doesn't just expand that into soft skills. It basically gives a carte blanche for any class of any kind. And again, I would be comfortable with expanding from STEM to include other things, but just the broad, removal of that focus.
These courses have to be approved by the community college system. So then you're really, and as I alluded to earlier in my presentation, when we introduce SAT as what we're going to use in the 11th grade for determining whether they're meeting our statewide proficiencies at that level, that was first started in Maine. And when Maine gave the SAT, they all of a sudden found there's a number of students that were not planning on going on to college, a number of students that said, I can never be successful. And they were getting scores well above 500, 600. I can do it. And so that's another thing with getting into these type other courses, they can learn, I can do it. And then you also then get involved with the STEM area. Yes, I'm a proponent of STEM, but I'm also a proponent that we need to offer the opportunity for students to get engaged in various restaurant type courses, etc., that they will then go in different, and then maybe get into the chemistry.
Thank you.
Doctor,
No, but I think the next one you got coming up is 542.
542. Establish academic research and improvement performance data analyst. Okay. Representative Ladd.
Thank you. This is a program which has been communicated with and put forth by the Department of Education. We have a department of one over there when we're looking at our statewide assessment, which we give to students in the grades 3 through 8 and then grade 11. And what we have, and yes, you can look on the web and you can get the aggregate scores, the scores for your state, the scores for your school. But does it really give the down in the weeds detail information that is needed for the individual schools to really assess and determine where their strengths and weaknesses are in their curriculum? Do these local school districts, and we have many, many small districts, Mary knows, as Representative Heath knows, as a result of being a commissioner at DOE, that many of these smaller districts have minimal staff. They may have administration that's tied up of a superintendent, part-time superintendent, and they may have somebody in charge of special education, but that's where it stops. There's nobody there in curriculum development. So how do we dig down and find out where our holes are? In meeting with Dr. Green over at the Department of Education and with Caitlin Davis, that it's been determined that for us to really do the deep dive we need into these scores, we need a data analysis over there, somebody that's going to be able to get down and measure student progress, evaluate program and instructional effectiveness, guide curriculum development and resource allocations, and promote accountability. So we're going to be collecting this data, analyzing the data, reporting the data, using that data for school improvement, mathematics, communicating through this information. We're talking about a position here that's about $160,000 first year. Then you'll see less in the request for the second year of the biennium, $145,000, seeing many of the startup needs, the equipment is already there, so that's why they have a little lighter cost there in FY25. This person is absolutely needed for us to really maximize our use of this information which we're having, which we're not doing right now. When I have asked over the years, and Representative Weiler and I have both asked the same information when we're looking for accountability, we just haven't been able to get the information. One person over there can't provide the information. How many times have we asked the department to really give us some specific information, data regarding these tests and where kids are and what we have to do? It's just not there. Tracking the cohorts back in 17, 18, 19, 20, I did that. I tore those tests apart and we looked at that, but that didn't go far enough. It didn't say, where do we have to help in mathematics? This is what we need right here. If we really want to improve mathematics in the state, if we really want to improve reading in this state, we're going to have more information. We're going to have to do a better diagnosis of where we are in these tests, not just doing the, here's your end result, here's where we are. And now we're going to lower the bar so we're all proficient. Doesn't cut it. So if we want to improve, we're going to have to give that resource to the department to do that. When I first came on board here years ago, there were curriculum people at the department. Is there anybody there now in curriculum and curriculum development? The answer is no. Yet we want to have all these statewide, we have responsibilities, a legislature, to set these standards. We have to review the minimum standards for public school approval. That's a responsibility of the state board, but they can't do that unless it's approved by legislative oversight. Do we have the information to really do a good job in oversight? I don't think so. And so what we have to do is, in working with them over there, they're proposing this. This is a need. This is a priority of the department, to have this data analyst over there to help interpret this and work with districts in helping them interpret their scores as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Ladd. I have found it very disheartening, quite frankly, that the department has eliminated so many different, well, I don't know if it's us in the finance committee that's eliminated so many positions, but I know that when I was deputy commissioner, I had 4 content area people, and I had someone who did the data analysis. And those people not only did that work at the state level, but then they went out to school districts, worked with school districts, held various amounts of workshops and trainings to build the skills that children need. I think it was a big loss for our state. So indeed, I am all for this. I actually would like to see us go back to more curriculum area people as well. But I would like to absolutely support this bill. And I know that it's bipartisan effort, and certainly Caitlin Davis needs a lot more help. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. Career development of teachers. What are we doing there? Are we going too much on the social side? I mean, if you have to recertify, over time, teachers, that is, I mean, where are we going? I mean, it seems so something's not working here. We're askew. And I just don't, I don't have the answer. Maybe, I know you've been around this, we've been around this for a while now. And it seems so we keep rehashing the same thing, have tons of development, career development within the schools. I know that for sure, being on a school board, and but it's not getting anywhere. The standards should be going much higher.
I think we got to get back on the bill, Joe.
No, but this is about the bill. I mean, what are we doing? I mean, we need somebody to analyze the data. That's true.
Now we're back on the bill.
No, but why? I mean, the question is why? Why are the standards bad, and are we not evaluating?
Representative Petrie, I'd be glad to talk to you on the side.
Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you, Chairman Ladd. I'm trying to understand, why is this something that requires a new position rather than something that DOE could potentially do with existing staff? I mean, I'm just, again, new to everything, so I would really appreciate a bit of background on what prevents the department right now from performing this, which would require a new person to be hired.
We have one person over in the department to do all the state right now, Nate Green. Got a doctor in this subject area. He's probably the top-notch person you're going to find in this state to do what he's doing. Exceptional understanding of all this. To really do this correctly, though, he does need that support. If we are going to want to have that data provided to us, if we as legislatures are coming forth and saying, well, on the extraordinary needs grant, we need some accountability. Okay, how are we going to measure that accountability, and what are we going to use to do that? Will we be using information that DOE provides us? It depends on how we set that up. But I've seen it that we have never had the information we need. Yes, we've had surfacey stuff, but we've never gotten down. When I was an administrator, principal, teacher in the classroom, we used to try to analyze our data, and we did back then, but that was a different state where I was. And we take our reading scores and we look at vocabulary, we look at comprehension, we look at all the specific skills and try to dig down and find out, is it the program or is it the certain skills which aren't being taught? That's the type of thing we're going to find out from this extra help here. Leaving it just innate to do what we're going to struggle. We, as the education committee has looked at policy and we consider that, we've been looking for data to be up on the iPlatform. And it's gradually getting there. The iPlatform, it looks at if you want to research these scores, you can go do that now. We would have been able to do that much earlier and in more depth if we'd had this person. And in the future, we will be able to do it at much more in a deeper level and better understand the direction we have to really go in. I've seen it now for 14 years. It's time to really give that support over to the department. A department of one person is not enough to analyze data for 160-something thousand students. And we've got to train people out in the field to be able to do that as well. So there's a lot to this job. The job description is going to be a very difficult one to fill because we're looking for really talented people, a talented person to do this.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to retain, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Right. Seconded by Representative Petrie. Motion made by Representative Heath. All right. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Okay. Thank you, Representative Ladd. Well, now we'll move on to House Bill 560, establishing a contact person notification program to assist law enforcement. Is there anyone here that wants to comment on this bill? Well, I think because it has the dollars in it, we'll go down the same path. So I'd entertain a motion to retain. Okay.
I should say, I motion to retain.
Motion to retain by Mary, seconded by Kate. All those in favor? Okay, unanimous. I'm assuming somebody's going to explain it to us at some point. Hey, we have somebody new. Representative Ladd, House Bill 638. Would you want to comment?
The Extraordinary Needs Grant. For the record, Rick Ladd, Haverhill, New Hampshire. This is, you heard the governor's presentation the other day. We're taking everything on the left, base adequacy, the 4 areas of differentiated aid. Then we're looking at the right-hand side of that formula, which is complicated and repetitive in many areas. Look at the type of grants we've had. We've had physical capacity disparity aid, the relief grade, the extraordinary needs grant aid, which Senator Aaron Hennessy put forth last year in SB 420. That came to the committee, the Education Committee for Policy. We've added in an accountability portion to that, where in that accountability portion came out of the recommendations out of the task force in 2018 on looking at extraordinary needs, the recommendations for having some accountability for grant monies. It also came out of the back in 2008, 2009, when Senator Estabrook was developing the education funding formula, which if we had funded it properly, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. But that also had an accountability measure within it as well. So within the Extraordinary Needs Grant you're looking at right now, that's just one small component of what is going to come your way this year regarding education funding. You're going to see HB 540 come to you, which is another area of differentiated aid, which adds a weighted component into that formula, as do over 40 states within this country. We just have one amount of money for differentiated aid right now, a little over $2,000. That weighted formula would, be at 3 tiers, and we'll explain that when that 540 comes, but that could jump the budget by another $10 to $20 million. It's not an early bill, but it is an early bill. It's one that they did not mark as early, but there certainly is a huge fiscal note to that bill. But this one right here, the Extraordinary Needs Grant, is one where we need to pursue this, and my suggestion is to look seriously at what the governor presented, a whittling down stabilization. We need to have, if it was my druthers, we wouldn't have stabilization in that budget. That $150 million is a result of a budget or a funding formula that doesn't work. Stabilization was initially put forward as a support for hold harmless. In 2008-9, when Senator Estabrook had it, the hold harmless totaled about $27 million, and that was it. Then we've gradually tinkered with that and tinkered with it. We took out the fiscal capacity severity aid. We took out the monies which are available for free and reduced. If you had a high percentage of free and reduced kids in your district, which was like over 48%, we're talking about a Manchester now, where they would receive twice the base adequacy. That was all taken out, and we put that $156 million into stabilization. What the governor's proposing is we whittle down the stabilization, at the same time grow extraordinary needs grants. And that is going to be a real trick to do, because there's going to be some that during this growing period may not receive, but we can't continue to fund ghost kids. So what we are here with the Extraordinary Needs Grant, what we added in policy was simply putting in an accountability measure for the Extraordinary Needs Grant. That will require discussion. I understand that, but it's just part of the larger package which is coming at you in terms of base adequacy. The governor jumped that by $1,000 per pupil. Looking at the differentiated aid, that was also jumped by the governor in one of those areas. And then the areas on the right-hand side of the formula, which we need to really correct and work on. I would say, as I see it, this is probably close to one of our number one priorities in education, to fix this and how we fund education. We have a lot of other important needs. We looked at some today, but this is absolutely critical right here for the towns which just can't do it.
Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Ladd. I have to admit that I am really unfamiliar with subparagraph D of the bill when it comes to speaking about unrestricted adequacy funding. Is there any way you could kind of walk me through that?
Well, adequacy funding, base adequacy, and the 4 areas of differentiated aid: English language arts, free and reduced, remedial reading, and special education. Those areas I just mentioned are part of the adequacy formula. None of that is restricted for specific use. It's for you, Mrs. Superintendent. You use, and school board use it as you feel appropriate to provide the opportunity for an adequate education. Beyond that, we start getting into areas which include the grants. Those grants are above and beyond, and you can allocate those resources towards specific areas. What we're trying to do, though, with this one right here, an extraordinary needs grant, we passed legislation last year where there is an accountability measure, but we found out if a district is receiving less than $50,000, and we have a number of districts in that extraordinary needs grant, we're only receiving maybe a couple thousand, $3,000. To have them go through all these hoops of trying to bring somebody in to look at how we're using it, trying to identify where we're showing growth or not showing growth, submit the paperwork and all that, or now online to somebody in DOE, they're saying, you can keep your $2,000 or $3,000. We don't have the staff to do that. It's costing us more to prepare the report that you want than we're receiving in the grant. So the report came back from the Department of Education. Let's have all those that are receiving less than $50,000 not having to submit that accountability plan. And the other thought was to make all this money not restricted, to unrestrict this money so it can be used where that district sees fit. Years ago, when we had fiscal capacity disparity aid, that was all unrestricted monies. You could use it where you felt it was necessary to improve your education.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick follow-up to this. I was thinking that obviously 50,000 is a reasonably high threshold for eliminating reporting. I mean, wouldn't it be fair to say that for a district that receives limited amounts, say that $5,000 or ballpark that we were talking about, that the reporting should be very simple and they shouldn't need all that expertise? I mean, couldn't we just change the reporting needs so everybody can report without being overly burdened but still have some accountability data?
As we work on this extraordinary needs grant, the extraordinary needs grant, I'm just working out in my head right now, that was right around $14.2 million. It goes down to 9 point something in the second year of the biennium. We're not talking a significant dollar in terms of the whole funding formula. As we move along and we try to consolidate, and it's something that I as a committee would start to look at, do we need to have a relief grant? Do we need to have a extraordinary needs grant? Do we need fiscal capacity disparity aid when they're all based off of F&R or they're based upon equalized property valuation per pupil? Shall we have one grant to simplify? Then if you're going to have more money in that grant, the 50,000 you might find as a threshold that most districts are going to receive a lot more than that. Depends upon where you go with this funding formula. So rather than messing with it as a policy committee right now, we took the recommendation of DOE, but knowing that probably extraordinary needs grant will, somewhere in the future here, it will grow. And that might be the singular grant that we have.
Thank you. And my original question, because this was a follow-up, in regards to the stabilization aid, you said that you are not happy with it. What would your personal thoughts be, as one voice in the State House on how should we handle it?
Stabilization, we've tried a lot of different methodologies for reducing it. I think some of you might remember the 4% deduct each year. And at one point, we even capped it, which we then had a lawsuit from, I won't say the big towns on the southern part of the state on the ocean. And we lost that lawsuit. And the 4% is since gone because it was not done in as graduated, had the waterfall effect. When you went over the cliff, you lost significant dollars. And of course, it's all based upon the previous year. And we saw school districts unable to plan and their resources properly. So this process of stabilization is something that, as a result, we have a formula that really we're not taking into account the loss of demographic in the state.
I know.
We're funding students that maybe don't exist.
I know.
And a program that once was but we also have inflation going on. And we as the legislature keep saying, you got to do more. And oftentimes not funding it. Special education, Fed said 40%. We're down what, 16% revenue from them? And we're having to pick up the difference there too now. So stabilization needs to go. That was a recommendation that came out of the study commission. That was last year, 16-1. I was the one, but I supported the reduction of the stabilization. It came out of the Umberger study back in 2018. Get rid of stabilization. Direct the money where it needs to be directed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, I entertain a motion to retain.
Motion to retain.
Thank you, Mary. Do we have a second? Second by Dan? Okay. All those in favor? Okay, thank you, Representative.
Time for lunch.
You've had a workout today. Okay, being 1 o'clock, it's time for the Department of Transportation. So the floor is yours.
You'll have to excuse me. I do have a little bit of a lingering cold, so I had to just get some water here. We do have a presentation to kind of walk you through that kind of gives you an overview of our budget and what priorities.
For the people who are watching, could you introduce yourselves, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to address the committee. I'm William Cass, Department of Transportation Commissioner. With me is Andre Briere. He's our Deputy Commissioner. Later on in the discussion, I'm going to ask Dave Rodrigue, my Assistant Commissioner, to come up and talk on some of the elements of the department that are under his purview. So, thank you. So, we do have a presentation and some information to go over that summarizes our budget, and then we can answer whatever questions you have. Also, when we had done the previous overview and presentation of the department, we had left you with a book giving an overview of the department and the agency budget presentation. We've updated that book for you all that has accounting unit by accounting unit, a summary of what their accomplishments are, what they do, and then the summary of what the agency's efficiency budget request was and the governor's request. So it's all summarized in a accounting unit by accounting unit fashion. But for today, what I'd like to do is step you through the presentation that we had put together. And I hope I'll answer most of your questions about our budget to start off with. A very quick recap from our previous presentation of the department's mission, transportation excellence, and enhancing the quality of life in New Hampshire. I won't go through them all again, but those are just a reminder, some of the key facts of the size and scope of the department statewide: 1,650 permanent employees, 2,159 bridges, and about 4,600 miles of roadway that we maintain. On slide 4 is a funding summary of our FY22 actual expenditures. So the actual expenditures for FY22 are $587 million, all told for the department. As I've explained previously, we tend to break things up into two major parts of our budget: the municipal aid and construction portion, which is a lot of pass-through funds, a lot of our construction program. That was about 52% of our actual expenditures in FY22, or $305 million. And the part in orange, which is our operating budget, which are the operating costs for people to work at the department and do the jobs that they do. The actual expenditures FY22 are $282 million, or 48% of our budget. And again, just in a summary at the bottom, our budget is comprised of multiple funding sources in the rough percentages there: a highway fund, federal funds, turnpike funds, other funds, and a very small percentage of general funds that support the department. On slide or page 5 and page 6 are a summary of a comparison, very high level comparison of the FY22 budget appropriations compared to the FY23 adjusted authorized. And then on page 6, getting to the heart of the matter, is the FY24 governor's recommended budget and the FY25 governor's recommended budget. So you have those all laid out there for comparison, but FY24, the governor's recommended budget, is about $757 million. Again, in the two parts of the budget that we talk about, municipal aid and construction funds of $415 million, or about 55% of that budget. And the operating budget is about $342 million, or 45% of that budget. What I'd like to draw your attention to, when you compare, say, the FY23 adjusted authorized to the FY24 governor's budget and the FY25 budget, is that the operating costs are very flat. But that was the budget targets we were given. Those were the budget targets we had met. Municipal aid and construction fluctuates a little bit with the amount of federal funds and things that we get. But the operating budgets and the operating costs, I want to just draw your attention to those comparisons. Very flat, with some very minor increases over time. Excuse me a moment. On page 7 of our of this presentation, gives a summary of the budget in a different format, in a bar chart that again compares the 22 actual, 23 adjusted authorized, the 24 agency and 24 governor's budget, and the 25 agency and 25 governor's budget. And it compares them by the mix of fundings that we have in there. With the turnpike funds on top, highway funds, the maroonish color in the middle. General funds is a very, very thin sliver of about 0.25% of our budget in there. And then other funds and the federal funds that go in to comprise. So that gives a very high-level snapshot of the funding makeup of our budget request here. And on page 8 is just a summary of, over time, of the DOT's authorized full-time positions. So you'll notice that going back roughly 10 years, through several budgets through 2011 through 2014, there were a number of positions as we consolidated some patrol sheds and tried to balance the budget by eliminating a number of positions. And since 2014, we've been very flat at about that 1,650 positions and continue. And I point that out compared to the next slide, slide 9, which compares those number of full-time positions with the vehicle miles traveled over time and how the vehicle miles have increased. So you can see the red line, which is the amount of traffic volume that's using the roadways. You see that dip in 2019, which was due to COVID, and how it's rebounding. But essentially what I like to point out with this slide is that I think the Department of Transportation is an efficient organization. We have shown that we have continued to do more with less. This chart does not reflect the current vacancy rate that we are experiencing of around 20 to 25% vacancy rates. But we continue to meet our mission despite that fact. So I like to point this out because I do believe that DOT has shown that we are an efficient organization doing more with less.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. Does this mean you have to rely more on contracted labor or contracted trucks, or does it make any difference?
It does. Thank you for the question, Representative Petrie. It does make a difference, particularly this year as we try to compensate for the vacancy rates. Historically, we have always relied on hired plows, even in the pre-2011 when we had more staff. We like to say we are staffed for summer maintenance, and we augment our staff with hired plows for the winter maintenance routinely.
Follow-up question. Also, your state prison, do you use any labor from the state prison for cleanup and whatever?
We do have a program where we work with, trying to think of a nicer way to say than prison labor, but we do have a program with the state prison where we have work crews that help, particularly with interstate and roadside litter cleanup and some tree clearing. Yep. I'm going to refer to my assistant. Oh, Dave, do you happen to know?
Yeah, we take about 12 folks on a daily basis throughout the year. At times we've taken more, so we have actually 4 different places that take work crews. Our District 3 office, our District 5 office takes out crews to work on the highway, fix guardrail, do trash removal, cutting trees and so forth. Our bridge maintenance folks take a small crew in the summer to help them wash bridges, and our Bureau of Traffic takes some folks to help with the non-federal funded portion of our pavement marking program. But that's become much tougher for us since COVID. So we're still doing that program, but it's not as efficient as it was 4 or 5 years ago. And we'll keep working to make it as efficient as possible so we can make the best use of those folks. We appreciate their help very much.
Yep.
And the cooperation we have from Department of Corrections in that program.
Good. Thank you. So that's a very top level start of our budget presentation. I'd like to turn it over to Andre Briere, who talk about the general fund divisions within the department. Thanks. Oh, yeah, Brad.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again, for the record, Andre Briere, Deputy Commissioner. The last time we briefed you, I walked you through a little more detail about these programs. Here, I'll just say that, the minuscule portion of the budget that is general funded that the Commissioner referred to is this, right? This is our personnel operating costs for the Bureau of Aeronautics, Rail, and Transit. In all 3 of these modes, you see quite a large pass-through federal funding dynamic. That's all handled by our general funded offices and personnel in those offices. The next slide, you'll see that what I just said, which is primarily transit is funded by federal funds. Again, federal funds pass through all 3 of these modes. But it is a small proportion there. You can see in the FY 2024 general fund budget, just 1.6 million will be allocated to the Division of Aviation or Aeronautics, Rail, and Transit, and FY 25 just a slight bump from that. That's primarily in the benefits lines. For our unfunded additional needs, I'll only point out a couple things here. With your indulgence, I would like to talk about the Aeronautics Program Specialist 3 position that we requested, and the implications of funding that. Just in general, when we do UAS drone operations, we do it at 18% of the cost that it would cost us to contract it out. So highly efficient when we do it with existing employees. The second thing is when we do UAS survey for instance, a highway project, we do it about 5 times faster than conventional survey methods. So I think I tongue-in-cheek told this committee the last time we were together that at DOT, we take pictures of things and infrastructure, not people. That is true. But this capability is really revolutionary. And when you see what's happening nationwide with highway projects, with airport repaving, resurfacing, the verification we can do, the ensuring of quality of work, this more than pays for itself over time. So those are a couple key points there. Another point I would make is, various states that we deal with and we're engaged through our trade organizations, AASHTO, primarily. Other states are fairly far ahead on this and are already realizing quite significant savings. Just a couple of note, North Carolina realized a 72% cost savings over traditional methods, and they've had their program for significantly longer than us. You see states like Minnesota that are implementing things called virtual twins that you can essentially really cut down and do remotely a lot of the inspection work that happens on structures such as bridges and other infrastructure. So quite exciting. The last point I'll make with this position is just a comparison in our region. Right now, Vermont, similar size, similar infrastructure, they have 6 UAV pilots with additional 4 to 5 that they have trained. Maine has 5 UAV pilots, additional 5 to 6 trained. Connecticut has 17 UAV pilots. Massachusetts has 8. They extensively use contractors, which is why that number is a little smaller. New Hampshire has 1. And we have more than 1 UAS, so we have more than 1 platform. Right now, we have 2 highly capable platforms. Newly acquired one has LiDAR capabilities that will significantly improve our ability to support highway projects. We have 1 operator. So 1 operator can only operate 1 drone. This position will let us significantly expand our support to highway projects. Right now, the delay that we have on highway projects goes so his backlog, our 1 pilot, is all the way back at July 2022. The requests that were put in last summer, he's just getting to now because of the backlog.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question on this. And I was going to ask you about the LiDAR. Can you do survey work with that LiDAR? How much does that save? And
Oh, it's a tremendous savings. So that goes into the overall cost savings. When I say we do it about, at about 18% of the cost of contractors, that's going to save a lot. We were able to give a presentation to Governor and Council beginning of last summer, where we kind of rolled through how we deploy this technology on, in this case, it was an airport project, and it pretty much wowed everybody. I think several councilors noted publicly at the time that they were quite impressed with the capability, and it's quality control too. So we can check on our contractors and verify their work is being done properly through things like thermal imagery. So we can verify that as they lay down tarmac, the seams are correct, right? It's a little hard to check from the naked eye, but a lot of capability implicit in this system.
Thank you. With regards to the other states and also what you're envisioning in New Hampshire, are these full-time positions?
Yeah, so the other states, when I mentioned 6 for Vermont, 8 for Massachusetts, 5 for Maine, 17 for Connecticut. Those are the full-time. They have other positions trained. And just to be completely upfront, my vision, as this is under my portfolio, is not to keep growing our Bureau of Aeronautics. We're not going to be adding positions willy-nilly or even significantly in the future. I think the future of our UAS program is to train and cross-train our existing employees to be able to operate these, especially some of our individuals that have volunteered to do this in our Bureau of Bridge Maintenance and in our operations division. So, we're the state of New Hampshire. We're frugal. My vision for this program's frugal but effective. So I think with these 2 drone operators, one of them can always act in a training capacity as we build that capability out with our existing workforce. Very difficult to do with one because he's trying to juggle projects and like I said, his backlog is over 6 months right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Do you have an estimate of cost for these 2 items, actually, the unfunded additional needs that you'd like?
Yes, ma'am.
About $100,000.
Yeah.
100,000?
About $100,000 for the position.
Roughly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and the transit as well.
The transit need, do
you want me to talk to that
Yeah,
real
you may
quick?
want to speak to that too, yeah.
So with that position, as the commissioner said, about 100. The other unfunded requirement is the state operating match for rural and urban transit to access additional available IIJA funds. Now we put that in as a request, as an additional need, with the anticipation of greater federal funds so we could access those. because that didn't make it into the governor's budget, we put this on here so we could more or less just point out that there are municipalities and the advocacy community that are going to be testifying during budget hearings as to what they would do with this need. We have a whole laundry list that the transit providers provided us as to what they could do with various funding levels, what happens if they don't get these matching funds. And really, when it boils down, is if they don't have these matching funds, it just limits the availability of federal funding for these projects.
So,
They're
based
gonna
on
be- oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
based on what you just said, so by not investing, there are a large number of federal dollars that we're losing. Is that what you mean?
That we have the potential
potential.
that we would leave those on the table.
All right, thank you.
Typically, these are, rural and urban transit facilities. State of New Hampshire, we have historically provided very little funding to assist with their matching costs. So the majority of the required matching funding, which is generally about 50% for the operating costs, falls on the municipalities, and they have advocated for a greater role of the state in helping to fund public transit. So with the advent of the additional IIJA funds and our additional needs, we had recognized, proportionally the amount of additional federal funds, an argument could be made to come with an additional level of state matching funds. At the end of the budget, it wasn't included. It was one of the additional needs that we had pointed out because of the increase in federal funds. But I'm sure through the budget process, the transit providers, you may be hearing with them, so that's why we wanted to just make sure you understood the issue.
Follow up?
So you don't have a recommended amount you'd like to put here? We will wait and see what the, those who are coming to testify will say?
We had a recommended amount in our agency budget request. It was
Could you
around-
just tell me what it
Yep,
is?
it was around $500,000 in FY '24 and around $1.6 million in FY '25. And that was proportional. That wasn't the total match. I know you probably hear from the transit advisors that there's even a greater need than we had identified, but our additional needs had identified, a level commensurate with the additional federal funding.
And that was proportional, but like the commissioner said, when the transit providers come, they're gonna most likely make a case for significantly more than that.
Yeah, I met with one of the transit providers and they're getting kind of squeezed from the feds.
Yeah.
Because they're required to do certain things
They-
that they're not fully compensated for. So the better they do the federal things, the worse off they are.
Right.
So it's kind of, kind of inverse for the state's benefit. Mary?
I remember Victoria Sheehan, when she was here, she spoke at length about the need for us to demonstrate more support so that we could drive more federal dollars. So I think that's something we really need to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of us are upset over the fact that many people going down the roads don't pay their share in gas tax. And I wonder if you could help us with telling us, maybe through the DMV, how many electric cars there are or multi-fuel things, so we can kind of get that out there the next time we try to pass something to get those people to pay some share of the road toll.
Sure. I don't have that information on the tip of my tongue.
I know you wouldn't,
it's
but I think
available, but,
if you can get it to us.
Sure, yeah.
Next year, we put in a bill and somebody say, oh, what do we need that for? We can say 20% of the cars are not paying anything. And the electric cars, they're putting an extra 1,000 pounds of battery on the road and wearing it out even more versus the 80 pounds of gasoline I drive down the road. So
Yeah, current registration of electric vehicles, as the commissioner said, we get you an exact number. That's always growing. You hear 8,000 kicked around, but that's growing constantly.
Yeah, and the ones that have kind of multi-fuel, or they might run on propane or something like other, or, you know, those are people that aren't paying a gasoline tax.
Yeah, and I know there are several bills through the legislature this time, you probably have seen or following them, that attempt to address part of the issue. You've testified at a couple of them, so, yeah.
Yeah, it's one thing to say, yeah, they're riding free, but when they're putting an extra 1,000 pounds on the road in battery, you know, that's even more wear and
More weight,
tear than
yeah.
just a regular car. So I think if we know those data, we can start making a fuss.
Yeah.
And
Thank
as
you.
know, sir, that's the long-term negative forecast
Yeah.
for the highway fund is also linked to that.
Yeah, can you just tell me what IIJA stands
Oh,
for?
I'm sorry, it was the infrastructure something after IIJ.
Investment and Jobs Act, I believe.
Investment and Jobs Act, thank you, yeah, you caught me off guard.
You'll hear it called IIJA or BIL.
Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act.
The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, BIL, is the way
Yeah.
some people refer to it as well.
And I apologize, I had it on the tip of my tongue last year at this time when it was new and stuff, but.
I just want to back up one, just for a second. In full finance, last term, we talked about UAS deployment around the state, not just transportation, but we had also safety, and we had, I don't know who all, we had multiple divisions or multiple agencies that were doing this. And at that time, it was just a rhetorical discussion. Is there like a central UAS nexus somewhere that you can get some cross training in different disciplines from different departments or whatever? I don't even understand the whole thing, but
Yes, sir. That's a great question. Through governor and council, we have a current contract for about $167,000 that's being used to fund a more wide-ranging look at how we implement our UAS program, how we best and most efficiently deploy those assets into the future. So that's an ongoing effort right now that was funded last year.
now is
When it comes-
you, or is we the state?
So we as in DOT.
Okay.
Now, our relationship with the Department of Safety and other departments that use UASs, we have a very close working relationship with those departments. Fundamentally, it is a different mission set. So I'm a former Air Force pilot. It's analogous to, transport flying versus, fighter combat operations versus close air support. These are fundamentally different missions. The law enforcement UAS mission is something that is quite unique and has its own training requirements, its own limitations. That's certainly not the type of UAS flying that we would be involved with. Ours is really focused on infrastructure. We're not chasing anything. We're loitering and we're taking pictures, so, but we are closely aligned and constantly coordinating with the other departments.
And I think also to some degree, Bureau of Aeronautics has kind of
They do.
jurisdictional oversight
They do.
over some of the administration of that too.
Yeah, by statute, we are the lead agency, the Bureau of Aeronautics on UAS capabilities. Having said that, we give great deference to our law enforcement partners who have different needs.
That's the summary of our general fund portion. So the two takeaways of that are that you will be hearing. We've talked about the transit need, as well as the additional position just to support the UAS program. And again, we identified that as what feels an efficiency and innovation, but we certainly understand the hesitancy in terms of growing state government and stuff. But it does, I think Andre had done a good job identifying that it is and could be an efficiency in terms of paying for itself over the long term. So with that, I'd like to turn to, I'm sorry.
I had one question with the rate of inflation that we have. How much is that affecting your bridge building portion? I mean, is it, and we know it's not linear because some things are costing a heck of a lot more, you know, and how much effect does that have on what you're doing?
It is having an effect. We've been hopefully it's somewhat stabilizing, but we've seen costs compared to what we had budgeted or planned on. We've seen cost escalation of 15 to 20%. So in a holistic type of look, that would be 15 or 20% less work that we would be doing. I spoke about the Infrastructure Act and the additional federal funding that we got. So New Hampshire got about 25% additional federal funding than we had previously to that bill. It came with a lot of expectations of more work being done. We are finding that with the rate of inflation that it's allowing us to essentially sustain the program and absorb those inflationary impacts, but not necessarily putting out a whole lot more projects. So in a nutshell, that's kind of been the impact of the inflation that we've seen over the last year. So with that, we'll turn to slide 12, and Dave Rodriguez, the Assistant Commissioner, is going to talk about the Turnpike Fund portion of our budget.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the record, my name's David Rodriguez, Assistant Commissioner for DOT. Back on the Turnpike system, the Turnpike system is a concise part of our transportation system. It's well defined. It includes 3 segments: I-95 from the Massachusetts border to the Maine border, the Spalding Turnpike from its terminus at I-95 north to the Milton Wakefield town line or so, and the Effie Everett from Nashua continuing up through Manchester and joining I-93 and ending here in Concord. So those 3 segments include about 89 miles of highway, 172 bridges, 7 toll plazas. We define the Turnpike system as an enterprise fund, meaning all funds collected through the tolls must stay on the Turnpike system. Those funds go for our operating and maintenance costs, our debt service, our R&R work, and our capital improvements. In fiscal year 22, we processed about 112 million transactions for $143.8 million of total revenue. On the next slide, you'll see the history of the Turnpike revenue. You'll see that in 2019, we thought things were looking great and revenues were increasing. And we all know what happened then at the end of fiscal year 20, I guess, when everything changed. We saw a significant decline in revenue. We've seen a little bit of a bounce back from that, and we have consultants who look at our transportation system and look at economic factors around the country and people's commuting habits. And what they're telling us now is they think we've seen most of the recovery from COVID, in that bottom line, people's traveling habits and commuting habits especially have changed a little bit. So as we look to the future, we're seeing projecting just a modest increase in traffic volumes that relate directly to revenue for the Turnpike system. So again, we're looking at funding being flat for the future. When it comes to the Turnpike budget, we did not have additional prioritized needs, but because we have bonds on the turnpike system, they're very specific in what we do first. And it's no surprise, the very first thing we do is collect the money. You got to do that first. Then you got to operate and maintain the system. And then we have to do our maintenance. And what comes last is our capital projects. So we have a number of capital projects that we're working on that are funded with turnpike funds. Most notably, we have the General Sullivan Bridge that we'll be replacing. We have the F.E. Everett widening that goes from Nashua to Manchester. We have exit 6 and 7 in Manchester that we would like to reconstruct. And we have Bow Concord, I-93, a large portion of that here is funded with turnpike dollars. So as we look at our capital program, we're seeing those projects being pushed out later and later in our capital plan. So this year we'll be starting our update of the 10-year plan process. And when we do that, folks, we're going to get to talk about what our priorities are and when we can realistically expect to build those projects. But it's important for you all to understand that while we're getting by, we have things that we had planned to do sooner than we're going to be able to do them with our current funding stream. And with that, Commissioner?
Are there any questions on the turnpike fund before we move to like the highway funded portion?
Yeah.
I just would. Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
thanks. The programs that you listed, are they all part of the turnpike? I don't know where Manchester exit 6 and 7 is, if that's part of the turnpike or
Yes, it
not.
is, yeah.
So these are all the 4 things you listed are all turnpike.
Are all
Thank you
strictly
for clearing.
turnpike projects, yep. And I would point out, Representative Petrie, in respect to your prior question, so on the federally funded side, where, the additional federal funds and the inflation have kind of offset each other, on the turnpike side, revenue has been flat. So as, costs increase, we're, as Dave said, we're pushing things out, take longer to get to at the same funding levels. So
You said something about the General Sullivan Bridge. What's with that? It looked like it was complete except for the approach.
if you drive over it, there's an old rusted section of the bridge is being removed and replaced with a bicycle pedestrian connection.
What's that estimated cost?
It's around $35 million.
Jesus.
Yeah. So moving on to the highway fund overview for the department. When we talk on slide 16 is just some of the things that we had covered previously with the highway fund, and kind of a reminder. The highway fund is not the DOT, and the DOT is not the highway fund. Revenue to the highway fund is generated from the gas tax primarily, and registration fees. Those are collected by Department of Safety. They do the revenue projections. Revenue from the highway fund is appropriated to various agencies. DOT, Safety, Judicial Branch, and Justice all receive part of it. The splits in FY22 are listed there. So in 2022, New Hampshire DOT received about 60% of the highway fund revenue that was appropriated from it. 40% went to Department of Safety and other agencies, as well as about 13 to 14% of the highway fund revenue that went to municipalities. And one of the points that I had made when I talked about the breakup of our budget between the operating budget and the municipal and construction half of the budget, the highway fund is the primary source of funding for our operating budget. So, which is, very pertinent to what we're talking about here today, the operating budget, as opposed to some of the capital projects in the 10-year plan that Dave had talked about. So on slide 17 is a lot of numbers. So I apologize for this. I know the committee in the past has asked for this slide, has asked for this information. And I just like to just step you through it because it is somewhat pertinent in how the highway fund works and how the gas tax is distributed to some of the elements in our budget as well as some of the other agencies. So the gas tax, the road toll, if you will, is 22.2 cents per gallon. And in FY22, that represented a certain level of revenue. So by statute, 12% of the gas tax goes to cities and towns through block grant aid, which is administered through Department of Transportation. So in our budget, we have an AU, we have an organizational unit for that block grant aid and that funding that goes to cities and towns. Statutorily, 2.6 cents, or about 3% of the gas tax, is about 3 cents minus the 12% to cities and towns. So about 2.6 cents of the gas tax goes to a restricted account called the betterment account, which is also an org in our budget, which goes towards the kind of state roads, heavy road maintenance. The betterment program is the primary source of our routine maintenance paving every year. So it goes to city. So it goes to it's restricted to go towards state highways and bridges. And then out of the 22.6 in 2014, there was a bill passed, SB 367, that restricted 3.7 cents of that to a restricted account that it goes to pay the ultimately goes to pay the debt service on the TIFIA loan that we took out to fund the I-93 construction project. So while the I-93 construction project is done, part of the gas tax that went into place to support that work, we are still paying for that, and we will be paying for that for some time. And I have a little bit more information on the next slide of that. So that's kind of the waterfall on that side. Motor vehicle fees are also a substantial portion of the highway fund. Again, 12% of the motor vehicle fees go to that block grant aid, cities and towns. And you can see there the net motor vehicle fees and motor vehicle fines also go toward the highway fund. So I just wanted to kind of walk you through how the road toll and motor vehicle fees and fines work. The very last 4 columns do summarize the split of funding for how much percentage-wise goes to the municipalities, how much goes to other agencies, and how much goes to the Department of Transportation. And there are some RSAs that govern a certain minimal portion of the highway fund that goes to other agencies and the Department of Transportation. So hopefully that's not too much information, but that's I wanted to just point that out because, like I said, it's been asked for in the past, but it does correlate to several areas of funding within our budget that again are driven by the revenue stream that's collected by the motor vehicle fees and the road toll. I had mentioned in passing the SB 367 TIFIA debt service. So there was established in statute a waterfall that came with that. So essentially 4.2 cents of the gas tax is of that road toll was dedicated toward this TIFIA debt service. Again, 12% of that goes first to municipal block grant aid. Then it goes to the debt service for the TIFIA financing. We did when we financed I-93, we were able to defer interest payments for 5 years after the project was completed. So the project was completed in 2020. So we were able to defer both during the construction and for 5 years after the completion of construction, the full principal debt service on that loan. And I wanted to bring this up in this slide because for the duration of while 93 was being constructed and until the full principal debt service kicks in. There was a waterfall where the additional funding from that 4.2 cents went to state aid bridge funding, and it also went to paving rural roads and addressing rural bridges. In 2025, the debt service, full debt service and payment of the principal does kick in, and after that, funding for state aid municipal bridges will begin to decline as revenue is projected to decline in the highway fund as a result of the gas tax. And also the $20 million or so, $21 million or so that we have been able to put towards rural roads and bridges will now go to debt service. So that will leave a hole in the program that has done a lot to address paving needs and things. So it's less of an issue, I think, with this biennial budget, but at the end of this biennium, and certainly when we get to the next budget, it's something to, I just wanted to bring to your attention because it will be something that we'll have to reckon with. Representative Petrie?
Right, thank you for taking my question. I see if you suspended the gas tax many people think that the gas prices are too high. And that would cause a, what, $174 million hole? Depending on, that's for the whole year, but depending on how
back
many
to the
months.
original, yep.
That would be quite a burden on your
If it
your
was
budget.
suspended for a whole year, it sure would, yes.
Or even part of it. I mean, it's 1/12.
Right.
For a month or several months.
Yep.
So, I mean, but that's, what would happen as far as the budget is concerned? I mean, would you have to just stop some of your bridge building or what? I mean, you got to plow the roads. I mean, you got to maintain the roads.
Well, that would be an interesting question. Most of our bridge building and stuff is done with federal funds, so it wouldn't necessarily have as much of an impact on our construction program. Certainly the personnel that oversee the construction program, but it could have a very real effect on our ability to plow roads and things like that as like I said, the bulk of our operating budget is funded by the highway fund and not the federal funds.
The federal funds, can you do other than federal highways?
No.
So that's another, so you're restricted in that sense.
Right, and getting back to the SB 367 and the 4.2 cent gas tax, I mean, that money was pledged particularly for rural roads and bridges, which are about 1/3 of the mileage of state highways that we maintain are not eligible for federal funds. So we rely on, state funds, whether it be the betterment program that I touched on, or these funds to address those needs.
Thank you, Commissioner, for coming today. So when the Tiffia waterfall stops, that's going to cut back on the paving program. But does the 4 cents also sunset at the same time?
The 4 cent sunsets when the debt service is paid off in 2035.
So it'll continue on.
Yes.
That won't. Okay, I thought it was going to be like 2 holes.
No.
Thank you.
So I'll keep going if there are more questions. The next 2 slides, and just a few things about the highway fund that I'd want to point out, and I'll be try to be respectful of everybody's time. Slide 19 is kind of a graph of the total unrestricted revenue in the highway fund over time. So you can see back in the previous 5 years of the prior decade, a declining rate of revenue into the highway fund. And since 2016, it has grown a little bit, but the outcome from this chart is to emphasize that the revenue into the highway fund is very flat. It's projected to stay flat. And potentially in the future with EVs and other increased gas mileage, decline incrementally. So as we talk about, continued inflationary costs and things like that, budgetarily, this level of funding is something to look at and address. On the next slide, slide 20, it represents in the top bar with some of the details. This is just meant to show that there have been a number of one-time fixes, one-time sources, one-time infusions of funding into the highway fund that have allowed us to help balance the budget over the years. So there have been things like a $30 registrations surcharge in 2010 and 11. Some things where we sold a bridge, the I-95 bridge, we sold it to the Turnpike system. So the Turnpike system paid the highway fund over a number of years for that asset, which was a way of helping bail out the highway fund. Most recently, there have been several transfers, general fund transfers into the highway fund, most notably at the end of FY 22. I know when the Senate was looking ahead and looking at the status of the highway fund, they put $50 million of general fund surplus into the highway fund to sustain it for the next biennium. So that's not terribly different than what Washington is doing with the federal highway fund as well, with routine infusions of general funds to keep the highway fund afloat. But that's the scope and order of magnitude of what has been done over the years to sustain the highway fund. And if you look at page 21, the next slide, that is the status of the highway fund. That is the surplus fund statement through the upcoming biennium. And a couple of points that I want to make on this. It does show at the very end of the biennium in FY 25 a positive balance in the highway fund. So that is being used. I pointed out the infusion of $50 million in FY 22 into the highway fund that's helping sustain us through this biennium. There are a few notes, again, with that level revenue that I talked about that give us a little bit of a pause as we look at the long-term budgetary stability here. One of the things that we had pointed out in our additional needs was some of the inflationary impacts of the major elements that we use for particularly winter maintenance. Salt and fuel are the two biggest drivers, and those have gone up, and we were projecting them to go up. Again, to meet our budget targets, we had level budget targets to meet. We had identified those inflationary cost drivers in the additional needs, and those additional needs were not included in the budget. The rationale of that was, some of the inflationary needs are fairly speculative. It's hard to pinpoint how much gas is going to cost next year or in 2 years. Same thing with road salt and diesel fuel and things like that. So the decision as part of this budget was made to keep it level funded, and if those inflationary costs manifest themselves in the future, we could go back to fiscal for a transfer to address that. Historically, we have not fully budgeted winter maintenance as well. We've always, we the department typically try to budget for a 3-year average of winter maintenance costs. Historically, we have underfunded winter maintenance, and every year for the last 5 or 6 years that I've been around and can remember, we have gone back to fiscal committee during the winter to seek additional funds, a transfer from the highway fund surplus to carry us through the winter. We just went was it last Friday or the Friday before last? last Friday to fiscal for a $3.4 million surplus transfer to carry us through this winter. So with those inflationary costs, with those trend of historically under budgeting winter maintenance, if those costs manifest themselves over the next 2 years, and we are going back to seek transfers, this $13.1 million balance at the end of the biennium may not be enough to carry us through. Again, revenues assumed to be flat. Those may or may not come in a little bit more, but I just wanted to point that out on the surplus statement, that those are some of the concerns that we see and wanted to articulate. The other concern we see in this is in the lapse assumption. Lapses are typically budgeted on a look back and trying to average it out over the last few years. I'm not sure if it's 3 or 5, but over the pandemic period of 2021, 2020, 2021, we had significant lapses, both because of hiring freezes and both because of other decisions not to expend money because of the concern of the status of the highway fund and things like that. So I think the lapses that we had shown in those years were inordinately high, and I think that's reflected in what's assumed for 24 and 25. But again, those high lapses are concerning to us. We do have a high vacancy rate that we're trying to knock down. You heard the governor's budget presentation. It does include a 10% increase for state employees. Hopefully that'll stem the tide and we can rebuild some of that. But with this estimated lapse, it could be a challenge for us to meet it, and we would not. It would be difficult for us to be in a position of having to not hire people and not and artificially limit the work in order to meet the lapse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at this. Are the lapses you're considering for 24 and 25, 27 million and 28 million?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. So a
Looks
quick
like we're looking at the
walk
right numbers.
Yeah, they're quite high compared to, what we have in, budgeted and adjusted authorized of FY23, for example. So, so it is an issue that we want to talk about. The other last point on the surplus statement here that I'd like to make, and it's kind of endemic of the structural deficit within the highway fund. If you look at the annual year, the current year activity, which is the line right below the total deductions, you'll see particularly in 24 and 25, and even this year, we are, I don't know if it's called deficit spending, but certainly the appropriations exceed the revenue by, 30 million, 37 million, $44 million. So that structural deficit is eating away at the highway fund. It's a big reason in that look ahead why the Senate did put $50 million of general fund surplus to carry us through the biennium. But I think it does serve to illustrate the precariousness of the highway fund. So I'll leave it at that, but those are some of the budget concerns that we have. We can take questions later. You looked like you were going to ask a question, Representative Bucco, but I didn't want to interrupt. But
My question was actually about mechanical services and equipment. And I didn't know if you didn't get to that yet.
I'm going to get to that next. Yep.
Oh.
So that was a high level overview of the highway fund. On slide 22, some of the additional needs in our budget that were funded, were the increase in debt service payments, the block grant increases to, which are tied to the revenue increases, at least revenue increases compared to the last biennium. Transfers to other agencies, including DOT, General Services, Department of Administrative Services, and Department of Justice for their cost increase. Other agencies were given budgetary targets of a 3% increase. We were given a level 0% increase in our budget targets. But there are transfers to other agencies for support and stuff that we did. We had identified those needs in the additional needs column, and they were funded in the governor's budget proposal.
Are we sticking with our 26%
What's the 26%?
for other agencies?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
That-
About that.
That's a law, isn't it?
Yeah. So the other thing, Representative Dugo, you had asked about the fleet. One of the asks that we did have in the level funded, we had a request of about $10.4 million over the biennium to sustain our fleet investments. About 2/3 of that was funded in the budget for $6 million. And additional to that is also the $200,000 which go along with the vehicle purchases for vehicle outfitting. So those were the additional needs in the budget that were included. On page 23, I overviewed the additional needs that we had identified in our agency budget request that were not funded. We had identified about 6 highway funded positions that weren't funded. We'll find ways to cover those needs. The driveway permitting positions were an attempt to improve customer service, improve and centralize the driveway permitting process. It does have a lot of interaction with folks, but it was a like I said, it was an improvement that we felt had merit, but it wasn't funded in the governor's budget, and we'll continue to address those needs with our existing resources. The next 4 bullets identify, what we had identified for cost increases in, inflationary impacts, both in salt, in fuel, and what we're paying for hired plows annually, and increases in utility costs. So those costs, we believed we were making a good faith, honest effort to reasonably project and identify those costs that we think we could very well see in the next biennium. Certainly we know from looking backwards at the last biennium, road salt, for example, has increased to about 54%. We've seen that in our bids, but we are not reflecting those additional costs as we go forward in this budget, for all the reasons that we had talked about before. Its effect on the bottom line of the highway fund, the potential uncertainty of it, but we understand the volatility of the projections, but we are concerned that if and when we do incorporate, come across those inflationary impacts, that we may not be able to address them. So those were the bulk of the additional unfunded needs that we had identified, and again, they were primarily tied to inflationary aspects of fuel and materials. We did have, in the last 2 bullets there, I had mentioned on the fleet investments, we did have a request of about $10.4 million. That was the level that we've identified that we feel we need to invest in the fleet to keep it up and sustain the fleet without losing ground. Ultimately, in the governor's budget, it was a little less than that, which is great. We'll make do with what we have. But in the past, when we have underinvested in the fleet, we have gotten really behind the eight ball by not keeping up with routine levels of investment and keeping up with our equipment. So I guess at the end of this, I'm concluding our presentation with the thought that it would be, we think it would be very advantageous to continue the investment in the fleet, to keep that and ask for consideration of fully funding our fleet investment request.
Well, on that point, so you're figuring it's about $120 million. That's what your fleet's worth, and to replace it every probably 10 years?
Correct.
Is that where that 10.4 million comes from?
I'll have Dave can speak to that a little bit more. The next two slides, well, the final two slides do have some very specific fleet information, but yes, I think I'll let you speak to it, Dave. I'm not
Follow up again.
probably this.
Have you?
And it's in the book.
Okay. Have you find it hard to get supplies to build your trucks? I mean, the supply chain specifically.
So yes, the answer to that question is it's very difficult today, number one, to purchase a new vehicle and get it delivered. Number two, when our existing vehicles break down, it's very difficult to get parts, and sometimes we're delayed in the repair, waiting for parts. And then as you point out, we do build our own trucks. So we buy the frame and chassis, we buy the dump bodies separate, we buy the hydraulics separate and build those. And like all things that are delivered, that takes a little bit more time today as well, which from our perspective is all the more reason why we keep up with it. We did give you these budget books, and on page 29 of the book is our fleet statistics as of July 1st, 2022. And I want to show you this table because this table includes our expected age and our expected usage. So as you can see, those are the first two columns after the descriptions. As you can see, each of our pieces, depending on the type, may have an estimated expected life of 15 years, 12 years. Some are 10 years, and some are 6 and 8. So when we come up with the actual budget cost, it's a real calculation based on our entire fleet composition as is summarized on this sheet, if that makes sense. And we do have a slide that speaks to that. That's a little bit larger, but we haven't included the expected age in that, but that spells that out.
Yes, certainly. So I've hit on a number of these things. So the very last slide, slide 24, to sum things up. I had talked about the highway fund revenue situation and the structural insolvency. And we are still challenged with employee retention, looking at a current vacancy rate of over 25%. On the operations and maintenance side, a big part of that high vacancy rate, I think, is attributed to our non-competitive salaries, and hopefully the 10% raise in the budget is going to help address that. We have had some declining service levels in a number of areas. In past budget years, we have identified program needs for tree removal and mowing and graffiti removal, and some of those needs that we have identified but have not been able to get to. in past budgets, those have not been funded. But they are still very real needs. We didn't put those types of requests in our additional needs in the budget here this time, primarily because of the vacancy rate. And we need to focus on rebuilding and taking care of what we have first and foremost before adding more. But I didn't want to leave the impression that with level funding and some of those things that everything is fine and good, because there are still some of these needs that, for the reasons I mentioned, we haven't identified, but they are still very real needs. And they are long-term challenges for us to address. So some of the things there, we talked about the fleet under budgeting. We've talked about the backlogs in driveway permitting. We tried to identify some resources to address that, but we'll keep trying to address it as best we can. I had mentioned the looming loss of SB 367 revenue toward paving and bridges ending after 2025. And through some of the questions, we've addressed the limited state funding for non-federal aid eligible state roads. Long-term state funding for rural and urban transportation, urban transit programs is going to continue to be a need as well. And in the very long term, we still do not bring much state dollars to match the federal program compared to other states. We rely on turnpike toll credits to utilize our federal funds at 100% versus the typical 20% match that is required. And then the long term with the declining waterfall and the SB 367, I mentioned the declining funding toward the state aid bridge program as well too. So those are some of the longer term challenges that I just wanted to place on your awareness as we go through the budget, mainly for edification and your information. So.
Well, I think a comment you made early on certainly applies, and that is you can't live for the lapse.
Right.
I think your lapse is going to start shrinking by necessity.
Right.
Because you can't deliver what you need to deliver with what you got.
Right. I agree. That was the point we're trying to make with one of the concerns with the surplus statement as it's reflected currently.
Yeah, because your mission isn't to lapse.
Right.
Yeah, we like something in SB 2 that says the lapse we have to do, but we don't have to fix the roads.
Right.
Right, yeah. Any other questions? Huh?
I just want to recall that during the last budget cycle, we had to subsidize the fleet with, I think it was actually capital funding that we used. So we can't, we can't, the department can't operate if it doesn't have a fleet, if it doesn't have vehicles.
Right, and I would like to comment. I probably didn't articulate that well when I said it, but that Representative Bucco is one of the primary reasons that we are advocating for fully funding our fleet request, because the legislature over the past few budgets has been very good through a mix of operating budget and capital budget, allowing us to kind of claw back and build back up the fleet investment. So we would hate to see that that investment diminished by not keeping up with it.
Right. And it's just like building maintenance. You can't, if we don't maintain it, then we're going to end up having to buy whole new trucks instead of keeping up what we have.
Correct. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies for being late. I had a bill that took way longer than I meant to. I apologize. Just a quick question. Of course, a lot of your concerns are because of the funding for the highway fund is affected by the change in the mix of vehicles and all that. There are bills that obviously are attempting to fix that, even by forming a committee or by fixing it. So what are your thoughts on how should a legislator go about, properly taxing the people who use our roads for the use of our roads?
If you don't mind, I'd kind of answer not necessarily as the commissioner of DOT, but a little bit more of a personal type of opinion, because I don't know if we as an agency have formulated a policy. Well, what we have, I mean, I would say as an agency, we're relatively agnostic. We can identify the needs, and how best to address those needs funding wise becomes, more the policymaker's prerogative. I do think, personally, and following it, that things such as the road user fee, things like that, which get at equitability of funding, do make sense to me. There is an argument to make that, a road user fee, whether based on registration of some sort, does fall a little more heavily on, the in-state, in-state people, and doesn't necessarily take into account, the tourism traffic that are using our highways as well too. So around the country, particularly in the West, Oregon, Washington, and those areas, they are looking very hard at much more of, again, that equitability standpoint of vehicle miles traveled type of model. There are some pluses and minuses with that depending on your outlook. But again, getting back to equity, somehow some payment of by how frequently or how much you use the transportation system would seem to make sense, and I think is in keeping with the original intent of the highway fund, which was set up to be a user fee, through the surrogate of usage of gasoline. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions. Thank you. And you can probably guess the second one. What are your discussions around raising some of the tolls? How, was the last time tolls have been raised? And my second question is, any anticipated plans to change the 10-year plan?
I think the last time the toll structure was changed was in 2009, when the tolls were raised to support the capital program that we have planned out today. We have not broached any discussions about toll increases. Others have suggested it. Certainly, as you compare to other states, New Hampshire is one of the lowest in terms of toll rates. But as we get into the 10-year plan, any changes to the 10-year plan, there are changes every 2 years. So we'll have to see, how that goes. Like I said, our goal is to present the needs and what we can do with the existing funding we have, and to maybe suggest some ideas of what could be done to either offset or compensate that. I think it was about 4 years ago, through the 10-year plan process, with some of the questions about redless bridges, particularly on the turnpike, with some of the turnpike capital needs. We were asked by the executive council to look at what it would take to fund the capital program more ambitiously, and we did review and put forth a toll increase package that could support that, and through the 10-year plan process and through the governor and executive council, it was not passed. So whether similar questions come up at this 10-year plan or not, I can't say. when Dave was talking about particularly the Turnpike program, we do have some very stark decisions to make on either our priorities, what's going to be done, or what's not going to be done. So
I think it is within our realm to raise the tolls. If we were to raise them by $1, so it would be $2, going both ways. Now that I have my Easy Pass, I never know what it is. What, in the top of your head, could you do a quick estimate on how much money that would raise for you?
not in my head. I can go back and ask the question. I would point out, Representative, that by statute, the toll rates are governed by the Executive Council.
It is by the
toll
okay.
locations and where there are or aren't toll plazas are
Seems like we have
viewed
done
by
it
the
before, because
legislature.
they lacked the gumption to raise the tolls, so we did it in the past through the legislation.
Maybe an HB2?
I know all the discussions that we have had. It's been very, very, very clearly stated that the governor and council control the toll rates, toll locations, and where the plazas are located. That came up recently with Merrimack tolls, that it was the executive council who voted to zero out the toll rates. They couldn't eliminate the tolls because the toll plaza locations are at the discretion of the legislature, but they could set a zero rate at those tolls, and ultimately then the two areas in Merrimack have been removed. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, does the turnpike revenue cover all the cost of the turnpikes? Because you can't use that money for other places, correct?
Correct.
So
Yes, it
is
does.
It does. So in other words, raising the tolls, you're just gonna increase that pot of money, so to speak.
When David pointed out the waterfall, I'm gonna just find the right slide so we can refer to it. So slide 14, sheet 14. Nope. 12. So the waterfall for the turnpike revenues go towards, I think you stated it wrong. I think first and foremost, it goes to pay the debt service. The debt service comes off the top for the bonds that have built the turnpike system to date. Then it's operating and maintenance costs. Then there is a certain level of R&R, which is rehabilitation and restoration, that we have to put in to satisfy the bondholders and keep the turnpike in good working order. So the toll revenues that we have today do cover all three of those needs: the debt service, the operation and maintenance, and the R&R work. Where we fall short then, and what's the last thing that gets funded are those capital needs, those bigger projects to either widen the Effie Everett Turnpike or redo the interchanges at exit 6 and 7, things like that. So, and those are driven by cash flow. So after operations and maintenance, after the debt service, after the R&R work are funded, whatever is left, can then go to capital. As operation and maintenance costs go up, as R&R work goes up, there's less and less available each year for capital funds. So the cash flow for those capital projects just extends out further and further. So in the answer to your question, the turnpike revenue does cover the needs of the turnpike. It depends on the capital needs, whether you view those as a priority or a discretionary kind of need.
No, you follow up, the bond, is that a fixed amount, term? In other words, turn it 2035. In other words, we have to pay it till 2035 because of the bond is usually fixed that way.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question. COVID really did a job on your toll funds. Could you use ARPA money to replace any of that? And based on your chart, you can't expect the long-term revenues to come up again because they've leveled off because more people are still working it from home, and that seems to become the status quo. So we really need to think about something. How are you going to continue to exist?
Right. I do believe that ARPA funds could be used for replacing lost revenue, not necessarily the cost delta going forward, but certainly for lost revenue incurred during that time. But no, and as far as going forward, the strategy to date without the wherewithal to consider a toll increase or other infusion of funds, has been to be judicious with the capital projects. And we've been honest through the 10-year plan projects, through the 10-year plan process of what can be done and what can't be done. And, as we push those projects out further or maybe not do them at all, we'll have to have a weighing of if that's acceptable, if that's an acceptable level of service or not.
Well, New Hampshire depends on tourism. It's a huge revenue for us. And without a good system of roads, Turnpike especially, I think maybe we're being a little silly not to think more aggressively about raising the tolls then.
Okay,
I need to call somebody and find out how we can do this. Thank you.
sure.
So we've had a lot of talk over in Division 1 about the exit 4A,
Yes.
and they want us to tell you to get going on it right now. What's the odds it's going to get worked on soon?
Well, Exit 4A is continually to be worked on. One of the first contracts is presently under construction. If you drive down 93, the next contract, we're trying very hard to get out the door for next spring.
And there was some talk about you haven't even bought all the property yet that you need,
Right. No, that's
and whether or not we're going to do the box culvert or
right.
the spaghetti route.
Right. As far as buying the property we need, that tends to be a critical path in doing things. So we bought the property that we had needed to advertise and construct the first contract. We are presently working on acquiring the property that we need to build and advertise for construction. The second contract, which would go up to Route 28 bypass. So.
So that's in your budget right now.
It is in our budget. It is in our capital program. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And it's being very actively worked on. The delays and the need to get it done as soon as possible has been part of the discussion with the box culvert. Our concern has been that, and the town of Derry's concern that is we take a step back with a different alternative at this point. It could delay getting that project advertised. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I want to follow up with Representative Heath. I understand Turnpike funds stay with the Turnpike, but perhaps ARPA funds, what can go into the Turnpike fund? What outside money can go into the Turnpike?
I don't believe there are any real restrictions on that. There are the one restrictions that do come with it is it can federalize the thing. So if we take federal funds, for example, so federal funds can be used on the Turnpike system, but if you do put federal funds into the Turnpike system, depending what section is, that then kind of federalizes that section and may potentially have less discretion on what we can do to operate that. An example that we had was the airport access road, for example, right there at exit, I forget the number, but 13, exit 13, which is the road to the airport. A lot of that infrastructure in and around there was built with federal funds. when the question came up about moving the Bedford Toll Plaza, maybe if it goes AT, moving it further south towards Merrimack or Nashua, there are no plans to do that. It was just a question that was asked some time ago. One of the things that we ran into was because we used federal funds on that portion of the turnpike, we did not have the latitude of moving the toll plaza and tolling a section of road that federal funds were used on. So that has been our historic restriction on using federal funds on the turnpike system, is that it comes with all of the federal requirements.
Since you brought up the airport, who decided the best way to get from, point A to the airport? I mean, you go off Brown and you take a left and you're like there. And one time I followed the signs to the airport from, the highway signs, and it was like 30 minutes longer to go all the way around and back. And you talk about spaghetti. Where did that design come from? And did you take away the information about getting off at Brown and just taking a left and going right into the airport because of potential congestion as the airport increases?
The end of that is, I was going to say yes. I mean, essentially, that was a long project. Decades ago, they got that done. Had many alternatives, but the primary reason was for the way it's routed now was to relieve Brown Ave for the traffic and the growth of the Manchester airport at that time, particularly.
Some of us remember about 8 years ago when the turnpike was doing well and they spent $8 million or something like that to the DOT to buy the last piece of road to get to Maine. It went from the Massachusetts border and it stopped somewhere before it got to the Maine border. And so they bought that last 8 miles of road for about, I don't know, $20 million, $30 million, something like that. And, it was a way to transfer
It was more
money.
than that. I think it was like 100 and some odd million.
I think it went on for 3 or 4 years. The money
Yeah.
was transferred over 3 or 4. But that was a way to transfer money from Turnpike to Highway Fund. But you run out of those options of doing things like that. It made sense because it was straight. It was the whole way across the state. So
Yeah, and that was, I know when that was set up, it was intended to be a longer term revenue stream of 10 to 15 years. And again, to balance the highway fund, it got paid out much quicker. It's reflected in that chart I had pointed out.
and I think it's still your most profitable turnpike. It takes, even though it's not the most mileage, it brings in more money than the other.
Oh, yes, yeah, the
the other
Hampton
two-
toll booth
yeah.
in particular, yes, it is, yeah. So I just wanted to just close, if we'll come back and go line by line, any specific detailed questions. I didn't want to leave you with the impression that we aren't satisfied with the budget. We certainly are. Most all of the programs and things, we didn't experience any cuts. Things were covered. We had some identified additional needs that we pointed out, but we can live with this budget, with the realization that if there are inflationary impacts and things like that, we will be back to fiscal and others to address them. So with that, that's what I just offer in closing, that we are satisfied with the budget, and look forward to working with Division 2 through the rest of the process.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, this Thursday,
There's a few snow flurries out there today. I think we got some snow coming tomorrow night and stuff, but yeah.
well, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Okay. Anybody else have anything for this work session? Okay. We're done for the day. We-
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
They're pushing hard, yes.
Well, I mean, it was, I think people were so bad.
Go down there, all about it, Hampton, all the, it's all the way up through there.
But at least they're not an island.
Well, you get places that